Today, we will be covering what exactly happened with the Forum campaign, those lovely individuals I just introduced, and all the things they got up to. If you remember from the last thing that happened for the group as a whole, they were heading south to the Hibiento region towards a town whose name I don't remember right now, in order to try and make a deal with a Burun named Kinzdazak. Now, as you can tell by the fact that he has two names, he is someone who has proven himself according to Burun society. By contrast, there's another woman there named, another Burun there named Lorkif. She has not earned her last name in Burun society yet. As they were heading down, the three of the party members, actually technically five, Guido Z, Snarg of Wildpaw, Guido of Granitholm Z, Fiernasil and Rakarg of Airfall all decided to go off and do their own things and focus primarily on a couple of more personal matters, most notably the fact they wanted to try and pursue a means of increasing their personal power because they felt that there was no way they could ever match Gerlin, and that was their primary goal. The rest of the party decided to go ahead and push towards more long-term, less immediate goals, like the furtherment of the exchange, figuring out what the hell's up with these assassins, and of course trying to deal with the ever-present threat of the Biotians, the Pinnacle, and God knows what else. So, the Burun I mentioned before, he is a food magnate, fairly wealthy, has a fairly large stockpile of food, and is more than willing to sell it. Sereth actually is the one who ended up arranging this deal for the rest of the party. And all he required was that they do a mission for him. Basically, he wanted them to humiliate Lorkif, the female Burun I mentioned, in a way where they would steal something that was of cultural, familial significance to her, personal significance, not something valuable, and steal it, bring it back to him, and then he would then present it to her publicly so that he could then gain status and favor, and she would be more subservient to him, right? It was pointed out the party also has another option, and they deliberated on this for quite some time. The alternative they could do is they could go to her and agree to work for her, or simply try to rob him to begin with and blackmail him. They had a few options. I'm just trying to generalize because they actually had several ways to deal with this. In the end, they decided to go ahead and go forward with the work with him plan. It took the party some time to try and infiltrate her personal manor, which was in a very defensible location in a valley in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Javan, for instance, almost died in the process of this in an extremely reckless attack that I actually thought was going to kill him. I thought we were going to be removing him from the campaign over this. He lived. But Zeiss managed to sneak his way in, thanks to some subterfuge, and again, nearly getting his comrades killed, which is very common for Zeiss. Sneak his way in and was allowed surprising amount of access to the area. And I don't think the party ever really followed up on this, but there's clearly something suspicious going on in that area, and regardless, he managed to find the item in question, stole it, got out, and everything went smoothly. They actually spent a decent amount of time planning this heist, and I don't want to actually undersell it, but of course the point of these videos is to summarize, because the entire point of these videos is for people who don't have the time to listen to 2.5 hours of role-playing, right? So they plotted this heist, they did a good job of it, laid it out, and they managed to survive the encounter. Got out, Zeiss got back and found someone who was in his room, and he tried to run after him, but he couldn't, because whoever it was just vanished more or less immediately, which naturally made them think it was possibly a desolate. Who knows, really, with those weird desolate people. Regardless, almost, literally seconds later, show military showed up, show policemen, I really should say. And they immediately arrested Zeiss and Javan, both of whom were trying to flee and kind of failing at it, and then ended up turning themselves in order to smooth things over. They learned very little over the next couple of days, but suffice it to say that Zeiss was being framed, because he didn't actually commit this crime, for murdering a diplomat from Alluvia who had been present here under the flag of Lightmane. This particular incident was one of the initial movements by someone, they never actually found out whom, in order to remove the Lady Lightmane from power. In so doing, they had to spend, again, considerable time trying to figure out a good way to get them out, to break them out. So the first thing they did is they went to try and, they had to commit to finishing the deal with their Burun friend in order to get that food, because they needed that food. If you're wondering why food is such a focus, the party was given, well, I shouldn't say the party was given, the party had been deliberating on what they could focus on merchandise-wise to sell in order to procure large amounts of money now. They needed capital now. Long-term investment, that's kind of easy in their position. But they needed money right now because the exchange was literally going bankrupt. And food is in high demand because the military is buying food left and right in order to supply the massive influx of troops thanks to the refugees from the Stoneholders and from Vassain-Lascelles. So food was a hot commodity, and they really wanted to get on that right now. So they completed that deal. And over the course of the next few interviews, they discovered that thanks to the way that show justice works, if Zeiss was willing to say, I was hired by this person here, and willing to testify in court and otherwise give official statement, whatever, referendum? Anyways, statement that person hired him in order to kill this person, Zeiss was free. Zeiss was not a criminal in that case, because that's how show law works. It's the person who orders the hit who does it. And of course they would have to prove that, and of course this is going to involve a trial, and God knows what Zeiss was going to have to go through. But fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the rest of the party stormed in, started killing the crap out of the show guards that were keeping Zeiss and Jovan, and were escorting them through the town in sort of a parading fashion, out in the open with kind of an with only very few troops to guard them at the same time that their elite units had just left the town. I'm sure none of this is suspicious at all. But anyways, they managed to kill the amateur troops that were left behind in order to guard Jovan and Zeiss and escape. Yay. As an aside, the party also encountered something else that hasn't really come back around yet, but will be significant in the future. There were these hovercrafts that had been present that the group had never really recognized before. They seemed to be very well armored and to have turret emplacements on them. It's something that had basically not been seen up until now. What these things were doing in the hands of of this random harbor town. This isn't even a big city. They're not in like a major city like Ebianto or whatever. They're just in a city and show. So what these units were doing here in this town, they never actually found out. But regardless, they managed to get out and flee! Flee north back to Holtburg. Oh, thank God. We got to Holtburg. Okay, Bonebreaker. Hey, Bonebreaker. Hello? Yeah, so Bonebreaker and Ogren, who were the... I suppose if you're watching this, you probably don't know who those people are. Bonebreaker was the one who was the second in charge, or the first in charge, excuse me. He claimed he was the second in charge, but he was actually the first in charge of what eventually became the exchange. He was one of the bosses of the undermarket in the Holtburg region. And Ogren was a young dwarf, middle-aged dwarf, who was an extremely good accountant. If you've been paying attention to the live campaign for the episodes that have already gone live as of now, when this episode's going live, you'll notice that both of those characters have already come back up in the live campaign, because they fled, they got the hell out of Dodge. They basically decided that the way things were being run in the exchange was not to their benefit, so they fled. They bailed, they took the money and ran, and they took quite a bit of money too. So Zeiss, Coulson, Rory, Jovan, and Higaide all came back to find an exchange that had people and paperwork and locations, some infrastructure, and absolutely no money, completely broke. All they had was the money that was literally in their pockets. And a bunch of people who may or may not be looking for jobs. And so they decided to start really focusing on this exchange thing, to really start pushing for that to be a thing. They also immediately tried to get a hold of Lady Lightmane, and we're having some weird difficulties on that. And for days, they just couldn't really seem to get any real strong attachment to the Lady Lightmane. They couldn't really get in hold of her. And finally, after several days of effort, they got a hold of Ursulon of Prowler, who was a drudge, who was the Lady Lightmane's one of her many underlings who had been coordinating with the exchange. He was polite and nice, but he sent a messenger in secret to them stating that the Lady Lightmane had been deposed and that he was fleeing the city. You're probably noticing a trend here. Maybe those two things are connected? Nah! Anyways, so with that particular revelation, the forum party's like, okay, we need to stop the coup, because there's been a coup that's happened. So they started planning to have a military incursion on the Royal District. Then they realized what that would actually entail and how impossible it was, and then they said, okay, we got to do something else. So they started working in a quieter and more subtle fashion. Started working on building a spy network in the area. Started working on really increasing their connections to other companies and trying to move the exchange more into the criminal side of things than the shipping concern side of things. And along the way, a few interesting things happened. First of all, Coulson got a job to take care of something with the Country Rider. The Country Rider, in brief, is the closest thing to UPS and FedEx combined that this continent has. They're actually pretty damn efficient and professional, but ever since the hub shut down, even to the Rider, they've been having trouble getting messages to and fro. And in the Holtberg region itself, they've been under attack recently and have been losing letters and packages, which is no good for business. So they hired Coulson and a few of his people to go look into it. Coulson got a small posse to go with him. Meanwhile, Javan went out and also was trying to negotiate a few things. Got a small, very small, like 3 other guys who were ex-military to go ahead and join him in what was going to be eventually called the White Scarves. In other words, his own private mercenary company, which, again, at the moment only consists of 4 people, but you got to start somewhere, right? The 2 of them kind of ended up crossing paths because Javan was looking into an increased amount of bandit attacks that were happening in the area, and Coulson was looking into who exactly was capable of actually knowing the Riders' routes and stopping them, and the 2 basically convened on a single one of these bandits' attacks and got the name, well, the title of an individual called the Lieutenant, who was claimed to be a, I forget the name of the race, but not a dwarf is the important part. It's not a dwarf. It's this other person. It's another guy. It's not a dwarf. I swear. And so they're like, okay. So Javan and Coulson decided to team up in order to look into this situation. They find a fairly well-encamped fortification area out in the woods, and it is manned almost entirely by refugees, with a few dwarves and elves here and there. And they fight their way in there and massacre the hell out of everything there. They just completely curb stomp the opposition. They were rolling very nicely that night. I remember it because I was like, God, this was supposed to be a difficult battle, and they're just rolling 19 after 19. 19. And so eventually a dwarf steps forward and says, stop. No more. None of this. The dwarf's name was Huldar of Anvilmar, and he is in fact the lieutenant in question. Now, of course, initially they didn't believe him because they were told he was not a dwarf, but after some convincing, he proved himself, and he was holding himself just a little bit weird. He was too regimental for just a bandit leader. You know, he had actual order and discipline about the way he held himself, the way he talked, the way he spoke and moved. And so they were willing to go ahead and take him in to be a prisoner until Coulson, by happenstance and good rolls, found a letter which was very well sealed and required a very careful and difficult operation to unseal without destroying the letter in the process. And Coulson and Javan actually ended up teaming up on this, both rolling their stuff in order to try and get it open, successful, and found out that they were here on the orders of the Illuvian military. Now, brief aside, I know we're not talking too much about lore in these videos, but the Illuvian military is secular. In other words, each region has effectively its own completely segregate military, okay? There's no one military for all of Illuvia. There's these different pyramids, make sense? So this is the Holtberg military, specifically, that had been ordering him and others like him to gather refugees, and of which there is a bountiful supply, and recruit them in order to rob nearby people. The funny thing is, this was also implied to be a replacement for the undermarket, and a lot of the goods that were being reclaimed were being distributed to the refugees, to the families of the refugees, more accurately, to the people who had no jobs and had no possibility of functioning, and were literally living on tarps or tents out in the wild. So they took this information back with them. Now, in the interim, Rory had been pretty busy. I give a lot of credit to Rory for this. He wasn't the only one, of course. Rory, Zeiss, Hagati, and the whole team really contributed to this. But they basically arranged to get a lot of humans into the Hidden Vale, that understructure of Holtberg, the city, and tried to give them jobs in the exchange, tried to recruit them either into guard work or into just menial labor, you know, as moving cargo around and whatnot. And in so doing, enabled a lot of them to survive longer than they would, encouraged a lot of them to not go after the military aspect like they probably would have, and as I have told them on the forum, they basically helped save the human race. Rory also had this really big grand scheme to basically ship all the humans, and we're talking about, 10 million people here, all the humans off to the Osteth Republic, and so they loaded several... I'm skipping forward a lot. Rory put a lot of effort into the specific details here, but, they got several ships with the Black Brine, and they loaded them up with people, and they sent them south, and then another ship, and sent them south, another ship, and sent them south. And all the humans are convening at this one town, the one I mentioned earlier, in the Hebianto Peninsula, to recoup, rest, do a head count, that kind of a thing. And then they would keep going and head down into the Osteth Republic. See, the big concern was whether or not the humans would be welcome in the Republic. In older days, yeah, sure, you want to live here, fine. The only thing you had to do in previous eras to live in the Republic was to pull your share. Now, things are a little bit different because the Republic really doesn't like anything that's going on right now, and in fact has been in session for, at this point, weeks, trying to deliberate on something. And will continue to be doing so for a little bit longer. Actually, that might be up by now. I forget the exact day. I have it written down. When the council, when the Senate of the Republic finally makes its deliberation and decides what it's going to do, which I'm not going to tell you because it hasn't been revealed to the viewers yet. But either way, he's been working with the aforementioned Maroon Magnate in order to try and get them into the Republic, and that's... Well, I don't want to spoil too much because even the forum isn't fully aware of that, but let's just say I know exactly what the result of that is, and I'm not sure Rory's going to like it. But at the same time, it will definitely move the story forward, and that's a great thing, right? That's a good thing. I mean, if a few million humans just go missing, that's fine, right? Okay, we're good. So that's what they were doing with regards to the humans, the human situation, the human refugee situation. Rory was also trying to get a little bit more training going on in order to make some kind of a militia, because they were still loosely planning this coup. See, over time, and I love this because it feels like it just kind of like, oh god, we gotta stop the coup, we gotta stop the coup, we gotta have a coup, we have to make a coup, and it just kind of shifted from one to the other. So right now the forum campaign is actively, and has actively for weeks in game time, in lore, been planning to usurp the new Lord of Holtburg, Myra of Hammersmith, a dwarven woman of some repute. The party has garnered some support from Lord Farin of Silentblade, he is the Lord of Glendon Wood, and Lord Aendia of Floralwind, I believe. I'm bad with names. of Lytlethorpe. And with their support, they think they could name Coulson the new Lord of Holtburg. They're not quite there yet. They're still working on it. But there's a pretty good chance that if they play their cards right, this is something that can happen. That's the goal right now. Now, Higaide, he had his own little adventures and misadventures. He wanted to help people, and there's all these... So he literally just gathered up a few hundred humans and said, let's go, let's save people. And he went north to Janwall, which was the town that was wiped out by that freak storm some time ago. And they were like, all right, let's help people. But with no plan of action, no resources, no funding, no food. That fell apart literally within a single day. And so Higaide is like, okay, hang on, rewind. Let's try this again. Took the people back, took the leader at least back to Holtburg and was like, okay. Took one of the women in the group, I forget her name, but I did give her name and said, you are now the person in charge of this relief effort group. Here's some funding, here's some resources, here's some backing. And she's like, okay, I'll see what I can do. And she found out that there's actually support in the Glendon Wood region for this kind of a thing, that they might be able to get financial backing in order to help provide support for the front lines. And so she was all for that. And so Higaide told her to hang on for a bit because they were planning a coup. And the woman's like, okay, and then that kind of dissolved, and so then they headed off, and now they're in Glendon Wood doing the good fight. So that's one thing Higaide has really helped out, is he's helped get those people somewhere where they can do some good, and some of them can die. Now, let's see, and so then we started really fast-forwarding the forum campaign a bit, because we were trying really hard to get the timeline synced up. They are still a month behind the live campaign as of now. We're still working on that. But the next few things that happened are a little nitty-gritty, but I want to cover at least some of the important ones. First of all, they discovered something odd. The High Queen of Alyssa has been absent since the Dry Reach incident. Ever since the Lords took power in Alluvia, the High Queen has been just she's effectively retired. She has had no public face whatsoever, except for very important, negotiations and whatnot. She won't even appear to other nations as a head of state. Usually a lord will do that. But she's been a little more visible as of late, and several companies that were connected to her have been purchased up. And there's a good chance that she started moving lately, and we'll see how that storyline starts to move very, very shortly. Suffice it to say that the High Queen is very likely to encounter the party very soon. Then we have... Coulson went to personally meet with the Lord of Glendenwood, Lord Farron of Silent Blade. I was very particular with how I portrayed him. I'm just going to summarize to you, because that's what this is, a summarization. The idea was to portray him as someone who is extremely intelligent, cold, calculating, and probably completely out for himself, but in a way that benefits others. Intelligent villainy, as I like to call it. And so he actually has a very, very high public... most people in Glendenwood support him as their lord. If there was some kind of uprising on the behalf of the rich or the wealthy, which has been a threat several times, and in fact the party was given an option to support several aristocrats to try and usurp him, but if such a thing was done, it would almost inevitably fail, because Farron has not only the military on his side, because he's the supreme commander of the Glendenwood military, just like all the lords are of their particular military pyramids, but because he has the people on his side as well. So just money is not going to be enough to combat something like that. He has also been someone who has been reaching out to seek peace talks with Navarre, which have been rebuffed to a number as of late. Not entirely sure what's going on there, but things seem a little weird. Coulson decided to do something that nearly got him killed. Coulson decided to lay it all out there and drop a name, which I'm going to drop for you as well. Gavis of Death Touch. Quite some time ago, Snarg had, literally by sheer miracle of rolling 20 after 20, managed to sneak into a high-security meeting of the lords and the High Queen and some random goblin he'd never heard of, but they dropped his name in there, Gavis of Death Touch, and he was talking to the lords of all of Alluvia and the High Queen herself as if they were his subordinates. So that name has kind of been in the back of the mind of the party ever since. Gavis has also been name-dropped a few other places. And the Death... Oh, excuse me, that's actually a lie. The Death Touch clan has been name-dropped a couple of other places, including on Mary LaSalle, in the company of several goblins who somehow knew how to speak or read, or however you want to call that, who knew psionic mind speak, which is incredibly unusual, to say the least. So Coulson decided to name-drop that individual under an assumption that he was the one supporting the Navarre Raiders, which I'll talk about in a moment, for retaking the Undermarket. And he was nearly killed for dropping that name, or the very least attempted killed. I imagine Coulson would then have to have a daring escape and maybe die in the process, because the odds were very stacked against him. However, he didn't die. Instead, the Lord of Silent Blade decided to change his tone and approach a little bit and give Coulson a little bit of rope, if you understand the meaning. We'll see what Coulson does with that. I said I'd talk about the Navarre Raiders. Let's mention them in brief. The Navarre Raiders were originally a small group of what's left of the Undermarket in Iraq, in Navarre, right? Through some unknown means, they have been receiving a huge amount of support. Political support, economical support, information support, backing, just all sorts of infrastructure. And so they have been expanding ridiculously rapidly to the point where they have conquered or consumed every other block in most of the western and northwestern region of the entire continent. So if you were to look at the whole continent over here, at this point in time, the exchange is this little blip over here, and there's a bunch of other blips over here in the Holberg region, and then there's this massive blob, and this is the Navarre Raiders. They control all of this, and they're still expanding. The party, realizing the severity of the situation, have quickly decided to try and deal with the Raiders on equal footing, because otherwise they are very likely to be consumed by them, just like everything else has been. So that's that. A lot of politics going on in this one, a lot of, kind of a lack of classic adventuring and dungeon crawling, but that's kind of unavoidable as long as the party remains in in the civilized land, so to speak. And I want to point this out because it's been mentioned before. Why is there so much politics and infrastructure and bureaucracy and diplomacy and all that stuff in your campaign? It's like, well, you're in the civilized areas. You're in the urbanized, settled lands. There's not even an adventurers guild anymore because there's no frontier at the moment. There is a frontier, it's just over there. There's the crater region, which is virtually untouched. There's the Dyers, which would kill you instantly if you went there. There's the other continent, which I don't recommend going towards. And there's a few other things that I haven't really revealed yet. So there is still a frontier, it's just the party in general hasn't really been getting to it yet. I imagine they will, especially since, well, if you've seen episode 46 of the live campaign, you know that stuff just got real. And that's going to lead to a nearly apocalyptic situation excessively quickly. Moving on. What am I missing? Okay, so Rory did his thing, and he's awesome, and Rory's starting to have a drinking problem. I don't really blame him. He's given what's gone through his life, he should have a drinking problem. Higade has been struggling for focus, but he's been doing pretty well. In fact, Higade recently put himself, for something to work on, Higade decided to start working on counterintelligence, trying to find the spies in their midst. To his probably surprise, he started to find a lot. The exchange is littered with people who are selling information about the exchange to other forces and organizations. Mostly little things. It's all very normal and mundane. Alluvia runs on money, after all. So this kind of thing is so commonplace to the point where it's normal. But Higade did get a few hints of the fact that there's some better placed spies in the exchange, and those ones are not reporting to whomever they're reporting to for money, and that implies something much worse. Let's see. I told you what Zeiss has been up to. I told you what Coulson's been up to. Coulson, the Lord of Holberg, isn't that a fun idea? Oh, and of course, lest I forget, at the point where we're at, as of now, from my perspective, of course, let's just say that a civil war just started in Alluvia, and it was kind of caused by the party. What are you going to do? But yeah, the aristocracy has decided to launch an all-scale attack on the Lord of Holtberg, and that's going to basically be the spark that's going to set off the military and the aristocracy and the lords and a few other factions that are kind of relevant within within Alluvia. And Alluvia is going to start tearing itself apart. And if you're paying attention to the timeline, that's happening right around here. Episode 46 that I just mentioned, that's over here. So you can kind of see how the dominoes line up there. Regardless, I think that's basically everything with regards to the forum campaign, as always. I recommend, I encourage people to ask questions and whatnot. And we will continue to do the story thus far, not just for the live campaign, but for the forum campaign as well, to keep you up to date on what they've been up to. So I hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time.